Picture a paradise of emerald islands, where the scent of spices filled the air and ancient kingdoms thrived in harmony with the sea. For over 3 centuries, Indonesia, an archipelago of over 17,000 islands, became the stage for one of history's most gripping colonial dramas. The Dutch, driven by a hunger for spices and global power, wove a tale of trade, exploitation, and cultural upheaval that shaped the region's destiny. Welcome to Voices from the Colonized, where we amplify the stories of those who endured empire. If you love diving into the past with us, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting our journey by checking out the financial contribution links in the description below. The dawn of Dutch ambition. The spice trade beckons. The story of Indonesia's colonization kicks off in the late 16th century, when European powers, chasing wealth and influence, turned their eyes to the archipelago's treasures. Indonesia, then a vibrant mosaic of kingdoms like Srivijaya and Majapahit, was the world's spice capital, producing nutmeg, cloves, and pepper goods worth more than gold in Europe. The Portuguese arrived first in 1511, setting up trading posts in the Moluccas, but their grip was shallow, focused on commerce rather than control. In 1596, Dutch explorer Cornelis de Houtman landed in Banten, ushering in a far more aggressive era. By 1602, the Dutch East India Company, VOC, was born, a powerhouse with the authority to trade, wage war, and govern. Unlike the Portuguese, the Dutch craved dominance, not just deals. They used brutal tactics, including wiping out entire communities to secure the nutmeg trade. Under leaders like John Pieterszoon Cohen, they burned villages, enslaved locals, and exiled survivors to lock down their monopoly. The Dutch set up Batavia, now Jakarta, in 1619, turning the port of Jayakarta into a fortified colonial hub that echoed Amsterdam. This was the launchpad for their campaign to control the spice trade, which filled Dutch coffers while draining local communities. By the mid-17th century, they had spread their influence across Java, Sumatra, and the Moluccas, often playing local kingdoms like Mataram against each other to tighten their grip. The Cultivation System. Exploitation by design. By 1800, the VOC had crumbled under corruption and debt, and the Dutch government took direct control of the East Indies. The Napoleonic Wars briefly shook things up, with the British running Java from 1811 to 1816 under Thomas Stamford Raffles, who tried some land reforms. But the Dutch came back in 1816, determined to turn the colony into a cash machine. In the 1830s, they rolled out the Cultuurstelsel, or Cultivation System, a ruthless policy that defined colonial greed. Javanese peasants were forced to dedicate 20% of their land, or 60 days of labor each year, to growing cash crops like sugar, coffee, and indigo for export. Run by Dutch officials and Javanese aristocrats, the system poured wealth into the Netherlands, nearly a third of the Dutch state's income at its peak. The cost was horrific. Thousands died building projects like the Great Post Road, a 1,000-kilometer beast finished in just 1 year under Governor-General Herman Willem Daendels. On plantations, especially in Sumatra's Delhi region, Chinese and Javanese workers faced near slavery, enduring beatings, starvation wages, and brutal conditions. The Dutch spun their rule as a civilizing mission, claiming to uplift backward Indonesians, but this was just a cover for exploitation. They lived in privileged enclaves, worlds apart from the locals they deemed inferior.
Resistance and the seeds of nationalism. Indonesians didn't sit quietly. Resistance flared early and often, though it was scattered. The Java War of 1825–1830, led by Prince Diponegoro, was a massive revolt sparked by land grabs and cultural insults. With much of central Java behind him, Diponegoro called it a holy war, but the Dutch crushed it, leaving around 215,000 dead, mostly Javanese. Other uprisings, like the Padri War in Sumatra and the Banten Peasants' Revolt after the 1883 Krakatoa eruption, showed the depth of discontent. These were local fights not yet united under a national banner. By the early 20th century, things began to change. The Dutch launched the ethical policy in 1901, promising education and reforms to quiet critics of their harsh rule. It didn't deliver much, but it backfired by educating a small Indonesian elite who started dreaming of a unified nation. In 1908, Budi Utomo, the first native political group took root. By the 1920s, nationalism was picking up steam. Sukarno's Indonesian Nationalist Party, PNI, founded in 1927, rallied around Bahasa Indonesia as a unifying language and rejected Dutch cooperation. The Communist Party of Indonesia, PKI, formed in 1924, tried a revolt in 1926-1927 but got crushed, with 13,000 arrested. Still, the 1928 Youth Pledge, declaring one nation, one people, one language, gave voice to the idea of Indonesia. The Japanese interlude and the road to independence, World War II, shook the Dutch hold. In 1942, Japan invaded, toppling the Dutch in weeks and tapping Indonesia's oil and resources. At first, locals saw the Japanese as liberators, but their rule turned grim, with forced labor and food shortages turning Java into an island of hunger. Still, the occupation weakened Dutch control and gave nationalists like Sukarno and Muhammad Hatta a platform to push for independence. On August 17, 1945, 2 days after Japan's surrender, Sukarno and Hatta declared Indonesia independent. The Dutch, with British backing, tried to claw back control, sparking the Indonesian National Revolution from 1945 to 1949. It was a messy fight, guerrilla battles, negotiations, and internal rifts between communists, Islamists, and nationalists. A 1948 UN-mediated agreement favored the Dutch but rallied global support for Indonesia. By December 27, 1949, the Dutch gave in, recognizing Indonesian sovereignty under a federal structure. On August 17, 1950, Sukarno declared a unitary Republic of Indonesia, dismantling the federal setup. The new nation faced a rough road: poverty, a broken economy, and regional tensions rooted in centuries of colonial meddling.
The legacy of 350 years, a nuanced perspective. The idea of 350 years of Dutch rule, a staple of nationalist stories, simplifies a complex history. The Dutch arrived in 1596, but their control grew slowly, starting with trading posts and only solidifying by the early 20th century. Before colonization, the archipelago was a patchwork of kingdoms with no shared identity. Dutch rule, through deals and brute force, unified the region in a way, setting the stage for modern Indonesia. The legacy is a mixed bag. Economically, the Dutch got rich off spices, crops, and later oil, while Indonesia was left poor, with little education and a torn social fabric. Roads and railways built for profit became lasting infrastructure. Culturally, the Dutch brought European laws and Christianity to some areas, but Indian and Islamic traditions, especially in Bali, held strong. Socially, the Dutch created a rigid hierarchy, with themselves at the top and locals at the bottom. Mixed-race Indos occupied a strange middle ground. Resistance from Diponegoro's war to Sukarno's nationalism forged a tough spirit that carried Indonesia to independence. Conclusion. From colonial chains to a nation's triumph, the 350-year Dutch colonization of Indonesia was a saga of greed, struggle, and transformation. From the spice-fueled rise of the VOC to the cruel cultivation system, the Dutch reshaped the archipelago, leaving both wounds and foundations. Yet, from this ordeal rose a unified Indonesia, born of resistance and a shared vision of freedom. The journey from scattered kingdoms to a sovereign nation shows the power of human will. Thanks for joining us on Voices from the Colonized. If this dive into Indonesia's colonial past gripped you, please like, share, and subscribe to keep exploring these silenced histories. Your support keeps these stories alive. Check out the financial contribution links in the description to help us continue this journey. Until next time, let's keep listening to the voices that empire.